Lesson 132 and 133. Adding, subtracting, and multiplying imaginary numbers. So now we're going to take that lesson that we learned earlier and build upon it a bit as soon as I get to example 1. Alright, example 1. Is 6 plus 5i plus 8 minus 3i wholly real or wholly imaginary, or does it have a real and imaginary part? Okay, so in order to answer that, we have to go ahead and we have to simplify this expression first. So we have 6 plus 5i. And remember the rules. When you're adding two sets of parentheses, when you're adding these expressions here, these binomials, if it's being added, you can drop the parentheses. Plus 8 minus 3i. Okay, remember, when it's only being added. Next, what we got to do, we got to combine our like terms. So we have a 6 and we have an 8. 6 plus 8 is 14. Right, you always want to write your, when you're dealing with imaginary numbers, you want to write your whole numbers first and then your imaginary. And then we have 5i minus 3i, which is a positive 2i. Okay, so simplifying that out, we get 14 plus 2i. Now we have to determine, is this wholly real, wholly imaginary, or does it have real and imaginary parts? So if we're looking at this, we have a real here, and we have imaginary. Okay, so for this problem here, it has both a real and imaginary part. Okay, example 2. It's going to start off the same way. Is it wholly real, wholly imaginary? Does it have both a real and an imaginary part? So we have 2 plus 5i. Okay, notice here it's being subtracted, so we can't drop our parentheses. Minus 2 minus 3i. Right, 2 plus 5i minus 2 minus 3i. So first thing we got to do, remember that we have a negative 1 out in front here, and we have to distribute that before we can drop our parentheses. I'm going to go ahead and rewrite the first set of parentheses because we're not simplifying anything there. 2 plus 5i. Now, negative 1 times 2 gives us negative 2. And negative 1 times negative 3i, right? That minus sign is stuck with that 3i, gives us a positive, right? Because you have a negative times a negative, a positive 3i. Okay, now simplifying this out, we have 2 minus 2. That's 0. I'm not going to write 0 down. 0 doesn't have any value. Then we have 5i plus 3i, which is 8i. So now looking at this part, we don't have a real part. The real part is missing, so this here is going to be wholly imaginary. Okay. Example 3. Now we get into multiplying. So we got to multiply and simplify this. We have I times 5i. Okay. So I times I, remember that that's going to be I squared. Right? So keep in mind that there's that invisible 1 in front of there. There's always an invisible 1 in front of any kind of variable or letter. So 1 times 5 is 5. And I times I, now we do I times I, that's going to give us I squared. I'm just write that in a different color so it's a little more visual. Now remember we learned I squared equals negative 1. Right? So that's a little side note. So we know that I squared equals negative 1. So we can replace that I squared with a negative 1. And 5 times negative 1 gives us negative 5. And that's our answer there. example 4. We have 7 plus 2i being multiplied, right? There's no plus or minus between those two parentheses, so we're not going to combine anything, we're going to be distributing. 4 plus 3i. Okay, so let's start our distribution. 7 times 4 gives us 28. 7 times 3i, 7 times 3 is 21. That's plus 21i. Now we go on to the 2i. So 2i times 4 gives us 8i. And the tricky part, 2i times 3i. So remember, 2 times 3 is 6. And I times I is I squared. Okay, remember, I times I is I squared. So first thing we're going to do, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and collect my like terms. And there's different routes you can take. You can deal with that I squared first, or you can just combine your like terms. I'm going to go ahead and combine my like terms. So I know 28 is going to be by itself. So I have 28. See, 21i plus 8i is a 29i. Plus, and then 6i squared is out here alone. Okay. Now remember that rule. We know what I squared equals, so we can replace I squared with -1. Right, because I squared equals -1, which would in turn make that expression a -6. So rewriting it one more time, 28 plus 29i minus 6. Now that gives us one more thing that we have like terms with. 28 minus 6 is 22. So that's 22 plus 29i. And we have a real part and a imaginary part there. And example 5. We have 5 plus I times 5 minus I. 5 plus I times 5 minus I. Okay. Again, there's no plus or minus between the parentheses, so we can go straight to distributing. 5 times 5, 25. 5 times -I is -5I. I times 5 is a positive 5i. And I times -I is a negative I squared. Right? And simplifying this out again, we do our combine our like terms. So we have our 25, -5i plus 5i cancels each other out, so that's 0. And we have our negative I squared. This one is a bit tricky because remember that I squared does equal -1. So if we put our bring our 25 down, we have our minus sign, and we know I squared is -1. So you notice we have that double negative there. And remember that double negatives turn into a positive, which gives us a final answer of 26.